Well, good day and welcome to SOP, Save Our Planet. My name is Gary Willing. I hope you're having a wonderful day wherever you are. Now, I always like to do two things because they are, at least the first thing is the most important thing to do after listening to this video. And that is take some time out of your day and look into this information, do a little research and see if it's true for you or not. I would be satisfied with whatever the result is. But if you go to the description portion of this video, you will see a link that will take you to the Share International site. If you click that link, it will take you to a website that gives you the best background information about Maitreya and the Masters of Wisdom, about the many miracle signs, about, how these masters will be teaching humanity if you read the Ben's Masters articles and so forth. So you've got a lot of information on that site to really get you going in your investigation. So hopefully you'll look into it, and it's free. And when I say it's free, I mean it's free. You do not even have to put in any information to read what you want to read on that site. So hopefully you'll look into that. The second thing I'm hoping that you do is to join the discussion. If you have a question you want to ask me, post your question in the comments section, or you can email me, searchforsigns@mail.com, or simply just let me know what you think by posting a comment. Now, I typically say, in the next video, because for the longest time I was just putting up one video a week. Well, yesterday I actually recorded 3 videos and kind of space them out over the week, so they're not just coming at you one day. But Eileen, I'm glad you're the one that asked this question, because I'm going to bump this question up to the next video I post. But you asked a question via email, and I tried to answer it in the video entitled, I think it's Miracle Signs That Will Leave You Speechless, or something to that effect. I think it's coming out on Wednesday, so hopefully you'll listen to it, because I tried to answer it without the clarification. I asked for clarification on exactly what you meant in terms of the history of how I came to this information and so forth, but I did my best. So if I didn't answer it the way you want, ask for a follow-up and I'll try to follow up on it. But this question I really wanted to talk about, because it's simple, it's to the point, and it's important, and it's about someone I cared about very deeply. Benjamin Creme, who was he and what masters did he have? Well, in terms of his master, the only thing that we know is based on what he said, is because he could not give the name of his master out. And there's a reason why, and I'll try to answer it as best I possibly can here in a second. But the clues that he gave, there were 2 that he gave in his publications and in his books, but then there was one that he gave in a talk in San Francisco about who his master is. Okay, so the only thing he was allowed to say, and that was published in his books, was his master is a senior member of the spiritual hierarchy on this planet, and his name is well known in esoteric circles. So if you know anything about the Ascended Masters, or if you know anything about the Alice Bailey teachings or the Theosophical teachings from Helena Blavatsky, then more than likely he's one of those masters. But we don't really know for sure, and it's not. But we will eventually. The other thing he said is we will eventually know who he is after Maitreya is out known for who he is. He's going to introduce this particular master, and we'll then know who who was working through Benjamin Creme. But the other clue that he gave was that his master was still in the Himalayas when, and this was in 2016. So he's not one of the masters that is already in one of the 5 major cities: New York, London, Geneva, Darjeeling, or Tokyo, or even the one in Rome or Moscow, or the one in LA or San Francisco. So he's still in the Himalayas. Now, Ben's story, I think, is quite fascinating, because it shows a little bit about, the way he spoke about it. It wasn't necessarily about him per se, where a lot of people, when they try to talk about their so-called relationship with masters, it all comes about them. And so he had to talk a little bit about himself, but he didn't really focus in on himself, if this makes any sense. So I'll try to do the same thing when I am talking about this story, based on what I've read and based on what he said. But he was a painter. He was born in Scotland in 1922 and had a fairly prominent career in the art field in London, because he moved to London when he was a young man, and in order to be an artist. And I'm not a huge fan of his earlier work, but I'm a big fan of his later work, when he was working with his master directly to come up with these paintings and so forth. But I think it was in the 50s, so he was in his mid to late 30s, I think, when this happened. But he was walking down the street one day, and a man approached him. Now, this man wasn't his master, but this man was in connection with the masters, apparently, and said to him, and just kind of approached him on the street and said, one of the masters is trying to communicate with you, and the messages are simply bouncing off you. And Ben looked at the guy and goes, nah, no, there's no way. But Ben said he kind of prefaced this story with saying that he knew about the masters because he had read Alice Bailey and the Theosophical teachings and the Helena Roerich teachings and so forth. So he knew about the masters, but he had no idea that he was even able to be contacted by the masters. So he's didn't have this sense that he was evolved enough and capable enough to be able to be overshadowed by a master at that time. So this guy came up to him and told him that he was supposed to be receiving these messages, but they were bouncing off him. And then he politely said, "No, that's not true." And the guy said, "No, it is definitely true. This master told me that to come talk to you and tell you to do such and such." And he was never allowed to say what such and such was. But he did say that apparently it worked because a few days or weeks later, he was getting out of the shower and he heard a voice in his head that was louder than his own thoughts. And it said to go to, I think it's Blackfriars Bridge, if I'm not mistaken, in London. But don't beat me up if that's not the bridge. But anyway, and he said that this bridge typically during the day had a lot of people on it, but at night it was very quiet. And so he was supposed to get there about 9 o'clock at night, I think is what it was. So he gets there at 9 o'clock at night, just as was told in his head. And the voice also told him that there would be some people there to meet him. And when he got there, there was a car at the end of the bridge. And he walked to the car, and there were several people in the car. And in the back seat was the person who approached him on the street a few weeks prior. And he said then the whole process kind of started. And he was trained by his master. And this is something that's very important part of this, because even Alice Bailey talked about having to be trained by her master in order to do what she did. But Benjamin Creme said he was trained for upwards of 20 hours a day, every day, for months and months and months, even getting into years, in order to be able to communicate back and forth the way that he did, without distortion. And so many people who claim to have contact with masters, if you ever ask them, were you trained? They say, oh, no, it just comes to me. Well, that doesn't work like that. You have to be trained to how to communicate, because we're not normally able to do that. So it's been said in the Ageless Wisdom teachings that even Jesus had to be trained in order to be overshadowed by Maitreya in that way. Krishnamurti had to be trained, even though they didn't really talk about it, but they had to be trained in the same kind of way. But Ben worked really hard with his master for years and years and years, but at the beginning of that training period, his master asked him to get a tape recorder so he could just, whatever he heard in his head, to recite it into this tape recorder. And Ben said he had, I think, thousands of tapes of this period. And at some point during this period, Ben's master said to him, turn the tape recorder off. Maitreya, his master, the master of all the masters, had something he wanted to ask him. And at that point, he turned it off, and Ben said he had this vision of Maitreya that entered his room. And he said he saw him clearly, but it was a vision. And at the same time, Ben had an experience as the masters see time. He could see past, present, and future all at the same time happening now. And Maitreya asked him if he would be willing to play a role in his coming back. And Maitreya said to him that he was hoping that it would be about 20 years. I think Ben said it was about 17 or 18 years from that point. So it was a little faster. And he was coming back far sooner than most people ever expected. But he was going to have to come back. And if he so chose, would play a key role in that. And Ben, of course, agreed, and then he was filled with all the love of humanity. He had this experience of all time as now, and he could see all the historical events of the past that he wanted to see, and he could see into the future a bit, in the kind of a little ways in the future to when Maitreya is coming out and so forth. And one of the things that he said that he saw, I believe, was people running down the street after hearing Maitreya at a venue, and this is in the future, he said, running down the street crying because they realized for the first time in their life that their life actually mattered. And then the vision went away, and then he went back to working with his master. And his master said, at some point you'll be asked to do this work further. And he trained with his master for decades. And then his master said, well, now's the time. You need to bring this information to the public. And then in the early 80s, he started to make the approach to the public about Maitreya and the Masters of Wisdom with the help of Maitreya, giving messages. Maitreya overshadowed him many times, giving messages to the world, and you can actually go on the Share International site and read some of those for yourself. There's a book that I bought that you can get where you can read them for yourself. There's a tape series that you can actually hear the audios of him being overshadowed by Maitreya. But anyway, he basically, in a nutshell, was the John the Baptist of our time. Now, he wasn't the only one that was asked by Maitreya to do this work. There were 4 others that were asked to do it. One, he was in London, but there was one in New York, one in Geneva, one in Darjeeling, and one in Tokyo. He did say later in his life that the one in New York was the closest to believing the information, and actually had come to a couple of his lectures in New York over the years, but never truly believed it fully. The one in Geneva didn't believe it at all, and the one in Darjeeling, he said, was still asleep. And then the woman, which was the only woman of the group in Tokyo, started to believe that she was Maitreya. But he was the only one that took up the work and really sacrificed his career as a painter to a greater or lesser extent, because he couldn't focus on promoting his career as a painter because he was focused on this, and really gave up everything because he loved humanity that much. Now, this person, I'm 53 now. I met him when I was quite young. I was in my early 20s when I first met him. Was blown away and astounded by how hard he worked. And he was an older man, so he's almost exactly 50 years older than me. So he was in his 70s when I saw him, and he was working day in and day out all the time because he knew how important this was. But his relationship with his master was quite astounding, because he said that it wasn't... There are other disciples throughout history and even today who are overshadowed by these masters, who know who the masters are and are doing work, whether it's in the political field, economic field, in arts, science, technology, or whatever. They are not responsible for telling people that they are working with the masters. Their job is in whatever they're doing. His job was to let people know about the masters, so that's why he was able to tell people that he was working with one of these masters. But he even said that his relationship with his master was quite unique, because he worked so hard for so long with his master that he was able to, just by a look, it would be his master looking through him. He would have that kind of relation, or a touch or a hug. It was his master and not him. Where other disciples perhaps have a close relationship with their master, but they don't have that same kind of closeness as he had. He said it was a unique... He wasn't the only one, because he said there were others that had that kind of relationship with his master. But his master referred to him as his window to the world. And his master worked through him, writing articles. All his paintings later in life about esoteric principles and symbols and stuff were all helped by his master. He said his master had a hand in those paintings as well. The one thing that I would say, if you really wanted to, I can talk all day about who and what Benjamin Crème was, but if you really want to know who he was, because he was a painter. I mean, he loved art, but his perspective on art was far different than what you would get from a general art historian. But I'll put the link to the Benjamin Crème Museum, run by a dear friend of mine, Scott Champion. But there's a video that they did that's wonderful, where she's reading what Benjamin Crème wrote in Share International about the Renaissance painters, their rays, and what the quality of this ray structure that was in their makeup, their point in evolution, and how that determined how they painted. So that's the reason why Rembrandt's humanistic qualities in the way that he painted was far different than El Greco or Michelangelo in the way that they painted. But it's a wonderful video, and I encourage anybody to listen to it because you can really get a sense of how these great initiates are. Now, most people during the Renaissance time had no idea that these Renaissance painters like Rembrandt or Da Vinci or whatever were working closely with these masters. But within, let's say, just Rembrandt, within the painting of that he did of these portraits of himself, Maitreya helped to paint a bit of him into those paintings. But the humanistic quality, the way that he saw his subjects and painted them in such a loving way. And the one thing that he said about Rembrandt per se was that Rembrandt was not doing that. He wasn't projecting onto them who he was. He literally saw the love nature in them and painted it. It's quite extraordinary. But like I said, I can't explain it the way that this article did. But it's about an hour-long video, but it's wonderful. And if you really want to get a sense of who Benjamin Crème was, that's the best sense, because he's talking about his livelihood. He's talking about the painters that he looked up to as a young painter and so forth for inspiration, these Renaissance painters, but also talked about how their work with the masters and the different qualities and the reason why this painter's painting looks different than this one and so forth. And he gets into the color and the color aspects and so forth. It's quite extraordinary video. So I would encourage you to listen to it. And like I said, I'll put this link in the description too to help you out, so it's easier for you to find. But my relationship with Benjamin Crème, I first met him in the summer of 1997 when I flew out to San Francisco to attend his annual Transmission Meditation Conference. I remember seeing him at the event that they had on a Thursday night, which was the public meditation. That was the soonest I could get out there, and I got lost. So I didn't get a chance to do the meditation. I ended up in Oakland, of all places, at night. It was like, so I got to the event as they were wrapping it up. I was so disappointed, but I remember seeing him, and I just, and he had a flock of people just asking him questions, and he had a long day, but he still was answering people's questions that they were asking him, and he was very gracious in that kind of way. He was funny. He had a wonderful natural sense of humor, and he had no problem having kind of an irreverent sense of humor about life, about these masters and so forth. And he did not have this devotional quality that most people who claim to channel masters did. He would make fun of some of them, you know what I'm saying? And it was quite funny and humorous the way that he would do it. But he did it in a very loving way, not in a mean-spirited way. But I saw him several times. He came to Atlanta a couple times, and this group here put on a talk twice in late 97 and 98, I think, were the 2 years that we did it. And so I was able to drive around with him and talk with him personally and so forth, and not have other people around asking questions and so forth. So I really got to know him in that way. And he's the same. He was the same in my car as he was when he stepped out on stage. He really did not change at all. He believed in what he was saying 100%, really 110%, because of his own personal experiences with the Space Brothers, with these masters, with his own master, and so forth. And he also had a wonderful perspective on the time, whatever it was, whether it was the 80s, 90s, or 2000s, or whatever. And I miss him terribly because of that, his perspective on things. And I would have loved to ask him about, what's going on politically here in the United States, to what's going on now with Israel and the political corruption coming up, and and get his insights on those things. Now, me personally, when I was in these conferences, he was not very nice to me for some reason, and it used to really tick me off. And it wasn't that he was mean to me; it was just he wasn't as warm and as loving to me as he was to other people. I would see him just be really soft and generous, and I would turn around and ask him, and he would just, he would go off on things. But the thing of it is, and there was a time where I kept coming to those conferences, but it was just I would put myself into the situation where I would sit down and have lunch with him and so forth. And the interview was fine, but I would kind of put myself out there and ask questions, and he would really slap it back sometimes. And I felt some kind of way about it for a long time. I'm not gonna lie. But the thing that, and I'm gonna leave you with this. This is the thing that it showed just how much he really loved me as a person, because it really it's even sustained me to this day when I talk about this. But so at the last conference that I went to was the last conference he went to, and I had already decided that was going to be my last conference because it was getting too expensive for me to go out there because I had a family and so forth, and that just ended up being his last conference. So that whole time, I kind of avoided him because I was, like I said, feeling some kind of way about the way he's kind of treated me over the years. And like I said, he didn't treat me poorly. It was just I had a lesson, and the longer I think about the way that he treated me with some things, and I'll give you an example. One time I asked him how much his paintings were, and he turned to me and goes, "You'll never be able to afford my painting." And that really hurt my feelings. You know what I'm saying? But I realized that he was saying things like that, and he was saying it in that way as a lesson to me. And it's really helped me with the work that I've been doing with this channel. But anyway, this last conference, the last Sunday, we're all leaving to go to the airport to fly out of there. And he's hugging everybody, telling them how much he loved them. And they were saying, "Oh, Ben, we, so honored to know you," and so forth. And I think everybody kind of knew that was his last conference. He was getting up there in age at that time. He was almost in his 90s, if he wasn't 90 yet. It was getting harder and harder for him to travel to the States. And he could not see. He was totally blind at this point. He couldn't recognize faces. You had to come up to him in his face and talk to him, and then he would remember who you were. So he couldn't see inches from his face. And he's hugging people, and they're smiling, and they're crying, and so forth. And there's this kind of line procession of being able to speak to him. And I was kind of in the line for a minute, and then I thought to myself, he's never going to want to give me a hug, because I didn't think that he really cared about me at that point. Right now, I see it differently. Right when I had that thought, he yells out, "Where is Gary Willing? Where is he? I can't see him." And then somebody, I can't remember who it was, turned around and said, "Oh, he's right over here." And he reaches out his hand somehow and grabs me and pulls me to him. And he was he was an older, kind of frail guy, but he was pretty strong at that point because it really jerked me toward him. He gave me this huge hug and said, "I love you so much." And that was the last thing he ever said to me. And then he died about 6 years later. Somebody asked him one time, "Who's going to take up your work when you're done?" And his answer was, "I'll be back." So, is he back now? I wouldn't be surprised. But he was a wonderful man in his own way. And I know for myself, if I were to go and think of all the people who really affected me and changed my life, he's at the top of the list. He's right up there with my parents. You know what I'm saying? And I would not have been able, like I said, I would not be able to do what I do on this channel if it wasn't for the way that he was with me, some of the things that he said to me, my emotional turmoil based on what he said, and having to overcome that and still stay in the conversation and the work and so forth and not give up. But he was not very encouraging of me. He only encouraged me to do two things. One was to paint. Well, three things. One was to paint. The other was to share my personal experiences with people. And then the third was he wanted me to read a book about myths, and I've never done that. But anyway, I love you guys. Thank you very much for the question, Eileen, and I'll look forward to talking to you guys again in the very near future. Have a wonderful rest of your day. Remember to take action and help SOP save our planet. Thanks for listening, and we look forward to talking to you again in future videos.